Hello, everybody. So it's interesting to hear so much information about AI technology, and I kind of look at this as like Uncle Ben, and that's the Spider-Man Uncle Ben. I just want to make sure. With great technology comes great responsibility, right? I do believe we're going to need to talk about the responsibility nature of with AI and technology and security, right? So I should introduce myself. I'm Cletus Earl. I am, like Chris said, a recovering CIO. Right now, I've been, CEO of a wellness organization called Mylera. But prior to that, I have a lot of experience with my colleagues, being the CIO, former CIO of Penn State, as well as many different organizations, particularly in New York State. But I am more interested in the folks that we have up on the stage and your perspectives, because we know with cyber issues right now, the current threats, ransomware, phishing, IoMT, which is Internet of Medical Things, and the zero-day attacks, all of the things that are out there. Definitely would like to understand more. While you introduce yourselves, I want to understand your perspectives of where we are with the issues that are at hand when it comes to IT, cyber, and AI, and how do we basically look at resolving those particular mitigations. So with that said, go to my right, Andrea.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Darty. I, too, am a recovering healthcare CIO in CISO, formerly the CIO at University of Texas in Austin, turned founder also in that wellness and healthcare space. It's an interesting time, I think, to take a step outside of operations and really be in the startup space, particularly because of kind of what's happening. A lot of, I think, the policies that we were hoping that would carry AI and the use of AI forward have certainly shifted in direction. And so a lot of folks are kind of left saying, okay, how do we move this forward? But also to that extent, I think we have to take into consideration the fact that, AI is still being defined, right? You ask every person up here, everybody's going to have a different definition. I know at my organization, we're really taking kind of that security first approach. We follow a NIST framework, but even beyond that, when we get into the large language models and the data training, it's how do we validate that, right? How do we ensure that we're not further perpetuating any of the biases? And so there's another question that I'll add on to that, but I think it's a very interesting time, and there's a lot of different approaches that you'll hear from us today.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
All right, very good. So Paul Contino, formerly CIO for University Hospital. I've been in healthcare almost 30 years, and I started my career as a research scientist. I've been in academic medicine. I've been at large hospital systems, and I've also taken dips on the vendor side, where I've done application development, product development. Started my career as a research scientist, did a lot of application development, got into IT, and then moved up the ranks. So I've actually had the privilege of working in the research side of AI almost 20 years ago. And so started out with natural language processing, neural nets, and then of late started to get into the generative AI, large language models. What I find interesting about the AI community right now is that there's a lot of hype around generative AI, but the field is not one product. It's a whole gamut of different technologies. And I think we get hung up on the bright, shiny objects. There's a lot going on that has accelerated very quickly in the last couple of years, but it's built on 60 years worth of computer science. And so what you need to do is you need to really look very carefully at what you're trying to solve. And I think the challenge right now is that there's a lot of product vendors trying to sell you something. And oftentimes, like in many other areas in healthcare, they don't necessarily know your space well. And so the use cases that you have, the problems that you're trying to solve, you need to be very careful about working to solve those problems correctly. And I think there's a lot of investment that's going on in AI right now, and a lot of money that's probably going to wind up being wasted because we're rushing into a field that's relatively young with regards to the products that are being developed. But go back to the science. There's a lot of very rich history in terms of AI, and a lot of things that have been done over the years that have been very effective. with regards to predictive analytics, with regards to imaging analysis, with regards to natural language processing. These are tried and tested. They've been out for 20 years, and those technologies can be built upon. What you're seeing right now with generative AI is a lot of newer technology that's, in some respects, democratized access to people who don't have the PhD in computer science or data science, and not necessarily using it the best way. So, I think as organizations, we probably have to worry about too much access to these tools and not really having a defined use case. And what I would suggest is that we maybe slow down a little bit, define the problems better, but also I think inside your institutions, you probably need to have better governance around what's going on, because there's going to be a lot of noise in the field. And that's not going to get better over the next couple of years, because I think that there's a lot more technology that people are putting out there. But you have to have the ability, and some of the discussion that was here earlier about having the right governance structure, having the right people evaluating and looking at the use cases and the technology is going to be critical for your organizations.
Rob?
Yeah. Okay. Is it working?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Hi, my name's Rob Seabaugh. I'm the AI vendor trying to sell you stuff.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I kid, but I don't. So look, I've been in IT for 20 plus years at this point. I've run teams in infrastructure and software engineering and application development and cybersecurity. And I've chosen to take a deep dive in really a focus on identity, right? What does it mean to have access to systems, data, integrations? And the AI topic's really interesting because you start to then unpack, there's a lot of the other talks that talked about it. Like how are we actually normalizing this? Is it correct? Is it valid? I think I agree that we're fast forwarding too quickly. Certainly there's a place for what they call horizontal AI, ChatGPTs, Geminis of the world, where you can go find generic information, things like that. But what we're seeing now too is this sort of depth on, vertical AI, where we're saying, hey, we're going to zero in on, look at AI scribes as an example. Like we're just going to zero in on not just being able to transcribe what's there, but then be able to make sense of it in a clinical manner, right? So, but we have to do that in a way that, that's written into a record that makes sense, that supports the progression of the field and the industry, and does it in a way that, frankly, only the people who have, should have access to that stuff do, right? And so there's a bunch of things to talk about in that manner, but it is comforting to sit here and be able to say AI ML and it not feel like a 4-letter word, because that's, sometimes that's what it comes off as.
Yeah, no, thank you. And this is not to beat up our partners or vendors, right?
Oh,
but it's
I chose
shared.
to the dark side.
There you go. But to Paul, to your point, this reminds me of the pandemic, in the early stages of pandemic, and you had vendors coming out the wazoo saying that they know how to handle the pandemic from a vendor perspective, and I call BS. Like this is the first time since 1916s or whatever. So we know that experience wasn't there, but they'll sell anything. So you need a trusted partner that's going to really do that connection, right? But with that said, academic medicine, different type community hospital, anything from critical access hospitals to academic medicine, we still need to figure out how do we assess the vulnerabilities associated. So can you give me examples, or give us examples of how you're able to assess this issue? I was at HIMSS, and 96% of the vendors out there had something to do with AI, right? So how do we assess and identify the potential issues associated with vendors or the solutions that are being brought to the table, and being able to bring a collective decision moving forward? Paul, I'll start with you.
So the challenge right now is that often the institutions that are buying these products don't have expertise internal about how these AI ML systems work. And so there is a bit of a trust factor. You're going to have to evaluate and at some point trust that the vendors are doing the right things with their technology. There are frameworks out there that if you're sophisticated enough, you can use to evaluate the products that your vendors are bringing to you. But it requires an internal expertise that you may not have. The suggestion that I have is you already work with a bunch of trusted partners. Most of us are not developing de novo AI and ML products. We're not development shops. We're not doing product development. So your trusted vendors are the ones that are going to actually be incorporating AI technology into their products. And I think for a lot of organizations, that's the way AI is going to get into your organization. And so spend time with your vendors looking at their roadmaps and evaluating how what they're bringing to the table makes sense for your problems, your use cases, and then start testing them, start using. I think for most of our healthcare organizations, we're not going to be building technology. I mean, you heard about Northwell Ventures. They've got the ability to build their own, right? But for smaller systems, it's going to be products that you're going to use as a service from your trusted vendors. Work with them on that. Now, the trust factor is an important one. I probably get dozens of inquiries about new AI products every single week. And they all want to test the product. They actually want to get in the door and do a POC. It's great if the vendor has enough expertise in your industry, meaning in healthcare, and can actually talk a good game about what the problem is they're solving. If they haven't been in the space and they don't have the quals, sorry, but you need to ask the appropriate questions about what problems they've solved, how they've done it, how they developed their technology, and then getting into the details. The technical details is hard for people who don't have the background in this, but I think you do need to ask very specific questions around how their technology is designed, how they're utilizing data, how they've trained their systems, and with AI, the fact is these are evolving over time. And so you have to have the ability to have regular audits and inspection of their tools to understand how things are changing, and then looking at the outputs of the technology, making sure that the technology is working to solve the problem that you hired them for. And of course, everything I'm saying is going to change in the next 12 months. So you need to constantly have vigilance about reviewing what's going on in the field. And I would say, if you're going to get into AI, you probably are going to want to have somebody in your team who's got the expertise in this, because it will get out of hand. The vendors will, continuously come and trying to sell products. The other thing too is we all are working on enterprise platforms, whether it's Epic or whether it's an ERP system. You want to try to leverage technology that's built in. Like we say Epic first, right? And we'll say Oracle first or whatever, because you want to go to those trusted partners to look for solutions. They will be the first ones and that can probably give you the best integration of the AI technology into the solution.
Thanks. I'm going to go in a different direction. So, Rob, I'm going to ask you around model protection, right? And I'll go to you, Andrea, next. What robust validation protocols prevent AI models manipulations and ensures integrity? Part one. And then how do you detect adversarial attacks on the data processing attempts?
Right. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So look,
Sent it to your way.
no, that's great. So I would say, look, I think one of the largest concerns, and everything you've said is valid, by the way, just for clarity, you have to hold feet to the fire on this stuff, right? I mean, there is a lot of facade. When you're looking to better your business and leverage technology to make it better, the other area to look at is beyond just your vendor. You got to look at your own data. Like, what are we learning, right? If you have bad data, you have bad input, and that's where I think when you start talking about training models, and you start talking about learning and expanding, then kind of the way you're going to run improvements in your business, you have to think about it through the lens of what are the targeted outcomes that I'm looking for, what are the capabilities I'm looking to enhance, what's the value that I'm focused on. If all I'm doing is training a model to answer questions and I'm not validating that it's answering them appropriately, I'm training it the wrong way, right? We also have to think about what when I talk about access for a moment, there's been several stories that have popped up about, hey, this is cool. We have this agentic AI, these agents that can help us on site. But if that agentic AI is spitting back PHI to people who shouldn't see it, we have a problem, right? Or again, if we've trained the model where it's guiding you down the wrong path, we have a problem. So to me, a lot of this centers around testing. A lot of it centers around understanding what's there, and then also, candidly, forums like this where you have peers that are going through the same thing. The goal is to learn from each other. There's two parts to your question, and I'm
Oh, that's good. Actually, I'm going to spin it a little bit.
Okay.
And from the academic side, I understand that there's a need, right, to protect the data. We heard about it earlier, research, but you also have an academic need to provide the ability to use the generative AI, all the tools, the large language models, when it's not localized and it's somewhere else. How do you protect that information? So can you just kind of give that spin to that answer?
Yeah, well, what I just heard you say is right. You've elevated kind of that risk surface tenfold, exactly. Right? So now you're not just worried about kind of your phishing and the typical things that you would consider, but now you have to worry about data poisoning, right, or model hijacking, and I think what you said about making sure that you have people that are informed or well aware, not just on the AI side, but also understand it from a security lens. I like to joke that I transitioned from a CISO to a CIO because I slept better at night. But in this day and age, nobody sleeps well at night, neither one of those roles. But you have to be very intentional about it. There's a couple of things that we used during my time at UT. I don't know if any of you are familiar with fuzz testing or fuzz validation, which is really a method in which you kind of, it's back and forth as you're looking at these models, right? And making sure kind of what goes in, what goes out is exactly what you're aiming for. So you design these parameters, and your validation period is just you're validating that data set, and it's kind of you're making sure that everything, the output is continuously returning exactly what you define. So, I mean, that's one element of looking at it, but to be quite honest, everything is so rapidly evolving, and the research needs are so rapidly evolving. I think that we're going to continue to see some new partners approach us with new solutions and design, but I think it's really the onus is on the organization to ensure that they're solving for selecting solutions that are actually solving for the problems that they have.
And how do you help protect IP, particularly organizations, intellectual property is a big deal.
It is a big deal. I mean, part of that can be covered in contracting, right? We're seeing, a lot more revisions of contracts and agreements. And the other element of it is really keeping that data set or those projects kind of behind closed doors. I know that was something that we did a lot of at UT, even with collaboration agreements. It took a lot to get access to some of those those research projects, those data sets. But it's nothing you do is foolproof, quite frankly. It's only as secure as the humans that are using it.
Oh, thank you. So, Paul, how do you create AI governance frameworks to prioritize while enabling clinical innovation around AI?
It's a good question. It gets complicated to a lot of the points that were just raised. In large academic institutions, you have multiple players. You're doing QI work, you're doing clinical research, you're doing clinical trials. So data will absolutely need to flow amongst different organizations. I always stress your GRC functions, governance, risk, and compliance. You need to have really strong committee structures to review the kind of work that's being proposed, whether it's a clinical trial or it's a industry-sponsored research or a vendor partnership, because it's gotten very complex in terms of the contracting. And that's the other thing that I would bring into the fold is legal, elevating legal's understanding of what's going on with AI technology. Talked about data. Data is gold in your organization, and the vendors obviously want access to the gold. PHI and patient records are an incredibly valuable and rich source of information. And most vendors, most founders who are doing startups, they want access, and they can't get it any other way except by partnering with you. The problem and the challenge is you got to make sure you have really good contracts in place to protect your data. And it's subtle things. I was just reviewing a contract a couple of months back with legal. Legal signed off on the contract. And I said, did you catch this clause in there about secondary data use, about use of your data with third parties? And they, like deer in the headlights, they didn't understand what that meant. And then, of course, being very clear, because sometimes contracts aren't clear, is to where your data is going to be processed and where it's going to be held, right? So that PHI that you want this AI vendor to give you an analysis on, okay, great. It could be de-identified, but where was it de-identified? On-premise, in their cloud, right? Where does it remain after the analysis is done? So there are lots of issues around the data and the contracting that you have to worry about with many of the AI vendors. Now, I'm not trying to make a daunting, situation here, but you have to be aware of it. Contracts protect you in the event of something not going right. We all want to have partnerships. We all want things to go. We want to support research, but the contract structure has to be there to protect you. And you sometimes need to work very closely. As a technologist, I work very closely with our compliance and our legal departments because the field is changing rapidly. And so just the concept of on-premise to cloud, and where data is flowing in that environment is sometimes confusing. And legal and compliance departments might not get it. And you need to elevate the discussion amongst all of those members. But again, back to how you support the security of an AI system, it really has to do with getting the right players together and making sure that as a team, you understand what you're getting into and then what the ramifications and the risks are. And everyone's risk posture is going to be different. Some institutions are very gung-ho with, AI and research, and it may be because they have the expertise in their shop to actually manage that. But if you don't, you have to understand the risk that you're getting involved in.
So Rob, this is kind of going back to your other side. You're on the dark side now. Let's go back to your
Sure.
early beginnings. How do you build the AI security awareness across clinical, administrative, and technical stakeholders? And then include where you are now as far as the vendor.
Sure.
Kind of to what Paul was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, look, it just like everything, it boils down to training, right? I mean, we have to build awareness. It's statistically, I was reading it earlier today. It's like up in the 90% or 90% of people using AI today are putting way more sensitive information into it than they realize, right? And like in your own businesses, I assure you, someone is going to ChatGPT and pasting PHI, and unless you've got the right tools in your cyber program to detect it, it's happening, it's going out there, it's in the engine, right? So we have to build a foundational awareness. Same thing we did with phishing campaigns, right? Like everyone knows what phishing is at this point, probably because it's been, just absolutely put in front of you from year after year, month after month of training and awareness, right? It's fantastic. We have to keep doing some of that stuff. It's a bit daunting, but it's important. But we also need to your point, I would lean on the kind of what was said a minute ago. You need partners, and like nobody goes at this alone, right? But partner is the key word, right? If a vendor shows up and they only want to talk to you once a year for a true up to, sell you more licensing, they're not your partner, right? They should know you, they should know your business, they should know what's driving, they should be invested and involved, they should be regularly in contact. And that goes for anyone who's helping implement, anyone who's helping guide, that type of thing, right? The other thing I would add is you put governance, risk, and compliance is huge, right? But governance does not equal compliance on its own, right? You have to, if you think about just leaning on the access concept for a second, if you all have access to private health information, and we send you a certification that says, hey, do you still need this access? If you just say yes and don't bother to read it and send it on, you may not. From years in a health system, you may have access that you really don't actually need, right? We want to kind of focus on how do we do least privilege? How do we do things that drive that footprint down so the visibility into the platforms are the same? But the same is said then, so to the other piece of this, the reason I bring that up is statistically we're 5x or more non-human identities in an environment today from human identity, meaning machine accounts, bots, AI agents, et cetera. We have to pay attention to what those accounts are doing, what they have access to, the footprint that's there. So when you start talking about building a program, to me, it's the structural foundation of your cyber implementation, and it's the end user training on top of that to drive it forward.
If I could just add to that, right? I think the narrative has to shift about AI and how we use it, right? It's not just a tool, it's a digital colleague, right? AI is embedded in everything, right? And so the same way that we would train our employees, right? We kind of have to take that, right? What's the benefit, but also how are we ensuring that everybody, I mean, I know from an IT perspective as a CIO, sorry, I know this thing's kind of going out, right? We would do red, but then also, right, look at our business line leaders, right? How do we, design training that's effective for them, right? So I really think you have to shift the narrative and kind of build it as that digital copy as well.
Well, while you have the hot mic or chicken mic, What AI specific elements must be included in healthcare security incidents response plans? And then this is tricky here, right? Not tricky, but detailed. And how do AI breaches differ from traditional cybersecurity incidents or breaches?
So to answer the first part of your questions, I would say AI watch zone. So, right, I think back to kind of when I got into cybersecurity, like late 2016, 2017, and designing a information security program, right? We didn't call them watch zones per se, but right, looking at ways, how do we prevent HIPAA from leaving our organization, right? We want to go across, but then also back to the last question, right? How do we educate our workforce? So as we think about AI, the AI watch zones, it's depending on how you're leveraging it. So if we're talking about large language model, we're talking about machine learning, things like that. We're training the models. We're looking at those data sets. It's what are we using them for? Where are they being used at? Who has access to them? When do they have access to them, right? So kind of going back to you were saying about privilege, right? And really implementing those same fundamental security practices to AI or expanding them to AI. And then what was the second part of your question? That was a really long question.
You hit it. You know, it was basically, sorry about that. How do AI breaches differ from traditional cybersecurity?
I think it's an interesting question to frame it that way because I can see it one of two ways, right? I don't think that, well, I could say that there are some instances or things that we've heard about or read about in the news where there isn't much of a difference, right? These threat actors enter the systems or penetrate systems in the same way. It's what they do once they're in the system, right? How they move throughout your back end systems. I think that's actually different. So, I don't think I think we were waiting on the event that's going to break where it's talking about model hijacking, right? I mentioned that earlier, or data poisoning, right? Where there's a data set that's been completely corrupted and as a result impacted patient output or outcomes negatively. I don't think we've seen that to the degree that we will see it in the coming weeks, months, years. But that's why we're having this conversation. I think it's really important for us to get in these rooms and have these conversations and understand what's working well at your organization, what's not working well, have trusted partners who understand our business models and what we're trying to achieve, the problems that we're trying to solve, understand what's important to us and where our focuses are, because we can't do it all alone. There's just, it's moving too fast and there's too much data that we just can't do it alone.
So this is going to the fire round because we want to leave out some questions. So over the next 90 days, what's the major thing health systems should do in order to mitigate the risk around AI cyber incidents? Paul, again, Rob, and then
I would say strengthen your GRC functions. I mean, I think that is critical in your organizations. I'd also have very candid and honest conversations with any of your partners that are doing anything with an AI roadmap. Understand their roadmap, because that will inform you as to what they're doing, what changes are going to come within your environment, and then you can start thinking about the security and the protections around it. I think for a lot of us, the security issues are going to be ones of querying your vendors about what they're doing, because you're not going to be able to protect yourself against model poisoning, right? It's their model and it's poisoned. Are you going to fix it? No, they're going to have to fix it. They're going to have to monitor. They're going to have to secure their environments. But again, this is where contracts come in, making sure that you're asking the right questions. You know how they're going to have an incident response, what they're going to do in the event that something disastrous happens or negative happens. So those are my two suggestions: GRC and contact with your vendors.
Thank you, Rob.
I totally agree with that. And the only thing I would add is, if all of you looked at your corporate IT environments, your infrastructure, things like that, you're in a hybrid nature today. I would almost guarantee not a one of you are behind four walls in your own data center, solo and alone, right? You're sitting in Azure, GCP, AWS, doesn't matter. You need to understand where you're at and where those inflection points are. Where does the data live, right? It's such a key point. And what is your critical data and what's not? Epic is an easy place to look. Like, we know that Epic's huge. Like, your EMRs have all the data that you care about. But somebody was talking about unstructured data in the last one, right? You have flat files sitting in your environment with PHI on it, right? Guaranteed. You have people who have left your environment who still have access to it, like, guaranteed, right? So from a security perspective, like, those are the things out of the gate beyond contracting, GRC, everything. You really have to take a look and say, hey, when I start thinking about AI and where those inflection points are, start to navigate that. Put your arms around it. Even if you don't solve it in 90 days, you've got to build some awareness and start Thanks again.
Thanks, Andrew.
I would agree with what my colleagues say. The other thing that I would add is understand how your data interacts with second or downstream systems, right? So secondary, tertiary, right? We saw right earlier this year the negative impact that can have when your data is, your partner is breached and the impact that can have to your ecosystem. So really understand where not just where your data lives, but where it's going and who has access to it.
Thank you. Megan, we can go to some questions. We have about a minute.
How are you handling, or how are you thinking about AI bots interacting with other AI bots? And how are you kind of walling that off? Because it's a whole nother level of governance around that. That's my first comment. My second comment is today we talk about AI security. What about the larger security program netting 80% of what needs to happen, and then obviously dealing with that 20% to really zero in and tamp it down? Just two questions.
Is that? Want to break it up one, two? Andrew looks like she's ready to go.
Go ahead.
The question about the AI bots, I think, is a very interesting one. It's something that we've been experiencing or experimenting with within my startup, and it's kind of scary, but it's actually really interesting. So what we've done is actually kind of created. I talked a little bit about these AI watch zones, but we've created a secure environment in which we're testing and validating that, and we've learned some interesting things. I would say that if I was a healthcare executive in an organization, that's not an area that I'd be willing to put my chips on just yet. I think that there's a lot that we still need to test and validate in that space, but I think it can be done in a secure, controlled manner. The second part of that, I think, when we talk about GRC, governance, I would say this too about security, right? We don't need separate AI governance. We don't need separate AI security. That should all be embedded in what you're practicing and doing today. It's just another area that we're adding on to that 80%. And so I think that's really important because you talk to different organizations and you hear that they stand up a completely separate AI governance committee, a completely separate AI security team, and that's all they focused on. But the reality of it is those same identities that access, 90% of your other systems at some point are going to be accessing your systems that have or utilize AI. And so it really should be embedded in what you're already doing, essentially just a bolt on.
All right. Well, thank you. We are out of time, right? Oh, we could start.
So I could
keep on going.
Question as well. So I don't think we forget we're seeing a lot of stable AI to AI communication. But as you heard, things like insurance companies dealing with denials and us having automated bots that would actually reach out to an insurance company. At some point, it's going to be dueling chatbots that are doing a lot of agentic work on our behalf. That's going to be an interesting time. I think we're not there yet, but people are experimenting with it. To the point about governance of AI, I think as was said, you shouldn't treat AI separately from the cybersecurity that you're already doing. All your multi-level, zero trust environments, all that has to apply to AI. And what you're seeing many of our security vendors doing is they're adding in the additional monitoring for AI technologies. And so continue on the path to security path that you have, but be aware of the differences in the way an AI attack could occur, because that's the key challenge right now. And the other thing I'd add is that for a lot of the technology that's in AI, a lot of it's open source and a lot of it is in the academic journals. So the technical architectures are exposed, which gives the hackers a leg up on understanding how vulnerable these systems are. So there's a chance that AI systems right now may be more vulnerable in some respects than traditional applications and systems that we're using today.
So this question's for Andrea. Andrea, where do you stand, and everybody else can chime in, where do you stand on the school of thought that says the best way to really protect against this is to have AI protect against itself. And the only way to keep things from getting out of hand, and the only way to regulate it is to have an AI program to regulate it, because the regulations are too far behind. Things are moving too quickly.
Well, I don't think we're there yet. I'll say it, right? I mean, when you think about the use of AI in clinical practice, right, you still need human intervention. We're not at a point of where AI can take care of patients. I think the same can be said in that regard as well, right? Yes, we are moving very quickly, but I think there's still, at the end of the day, we're still in healthcare, which means patient lives. And so I still think that there needs to be that human touch, that human review, that human validation to say, hey, yes, this makes sense. Hey, no, this is not protecting. Hey, we need to expand this beyond kind of those original parameters that were set. It's ever evolving, and I think that we can partner with or allow AI to be that digital colleague to help guide us. But I don't think we're quite at that point to where it's like AI to AI, and they're on the front seat and humans are on the back seat.
I think it's early days in healthcare, but you're already seeing the AI arms race going on in cyber, where you got attack and defense going on with AI tools on both sides. So I only think it's natural to think the progression is going to happen into other areas.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be accelerated exponentially when quantum computing comes aboard, and we can't even control it. But I agree, we're not there yet, but you still need to have human actors on either side. So, and again, who teaches who, right? We do understand that AI is inherently flawed by those who are programming it, right? So there's equity elements associated. So we just
I would just add,
Over.
like every decision you make, it's risk reward, right?
Yep.
So it's no matter what you do from a technology perspective, there's going to be a risk. The goal is a reward. How many of you have experienced new technology in your environments that just created friction on your daily job, right? It happens way too often. This is an opportunity for new things to come about that make that easier. When you start thinking about, my brain goes back to some of the earlier conversations. You think about Microsoft Teams, if that's what you use. Imagine just being able to talk to something and be like, hey, I'm picking up a shift in another department. What access do I need, right? And it probably this, would you like me to request it? Starting to follow through, make tasks way easier than trying to go find something. That's just one example. So yeah, the AI to AI thing, we've got to figure out. We have to build that security, but I wouldn't call it all dark and ominous, right? I mean, there's definitely security risk, a lot of things we've talked about, but the business value facing out is huge for everyone. It's a massive, again, risk reward, how you dial that in, how you secure it, and how you govern it.
I do have one more point to make, though, going back to how do we make sure things are controlled? And again, going back to the contract side, many organizations now, whether they're doing Epic or Oracle, going to the cloud, again, you should really put in some definitions about where that data sits, right? Your EHR data, because if it's not, many cases it can be anywhere around the globe, put those perspectives in that it doesn't leave the shores, right? And having some type of guardrails around that, or else you may find yourself in a situation where that cloud-based data is being susceptible to whether it's AI or any type of cybersecurity vulnerability.
I think that's especially important with your managed service providers too.
Yeah. And I would add, and this adds more complexity for someone on my side of the fence, but almost every health system we interact with now is coming to us with AI assessments. What are you doing? What technologies are you using? Where does the data live? Like treating it exactly like they do everything else. And that's super important. Again, hold your vendors accountable, hold your partners accountable.
It's critical to have third-party risk assessments.
Yes.
You need them, and you need to do them more regularly. Once you have one, I know I'm not going to name the organization, but previous organization, they did it once upon contract signing, and then they really never did it again. So it's like, that should be a regular review, especially now with the pace of change in technology. Even a year going by, a lot can change. So do the third-party risk assessments.